shortly after the Revolution, when the church was finished. It did not look like this at all during the Revolution because it was unfinished. You had a dirt floor, you had raw stone walls, no pews. It was just a large open space, more like a warehouse. I imagine that the windows, I know the windows had no glass. I imagine that they were covered over with boards to keep the weather and birds and critters out of the construction, and that's what it would have looked like when the Hessians in particular took it over to make it a hospital. So you can't look about and find your boyfriend or your girlfriend and focus on irrelevant thoughts.
Irrelevant.
And it also kept you out of drafts when the doors opened, or if the walls weren't tight, windows weren't tight. You'd take hot coals from the fire, put them inside the tin box. It's got a wood frame so you can rest your feet on it without burning. I think maybe more likely put it between your feet and throw a blanket.
Election for an open seat in the New York Colonial Assembly that came at the time of a really serious political fight in New York between the governor, the royal governor, who was a high-handed, probably corrupt figure, and an opposition party. And right in the midst of that political conflict, there was an election here. So it became much more than just one seat in one town. It became the big event in New York politics. So you had an unusually large turnout, and it overlapped with the first issue of the first Free Press. So for the first time in America, we get a long, multi-paragraph descriptive article about how early Americans voted, how they marched in, they lined up, the issues that seemed to matter to them, their voting procedures. We did have 400 men standing in this vicinity on that
Men
day.
only.
Right. Yeah. Property owners. Oh,
Yeah.
oh yes, all the limitations
Yeah.
of its day.
Yeah.
But we should remember that in much of the world at this time, nobody voted at all. So with all its limitations compared to what we expect today, it was democracy as they knew it at the time. So, I'm not saying it was a perfect election, but most places in the world in the 1730s, nobody voted at all.
This is the oldest
It's
one.
the oldest one. I do have a picture
And what was
of
the
it.
year?
1704, February
1704.
14th.
February. Oh,
I got it.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, you know what his last name is, ironically?
Oh no, what's his
His
name?
last name is Valentine.
No way.
Total coincidence.
No, I don't believe
All right,
that.
yeah, okay.
Yep.
Wow. MV, Matthew Valentine, and he died on Valentine's Day.
Less than a mile from here, the majority of the Battle of Pell's Point took place, October 18, 1776. Washington's army was in the upper end of Manhattan Island, where he realized that he could easily be trapped because an army can't walk over the Hudson River or any river. And if the British were to land forces in lower Westchester and get behind him, he would be trapped between all of their forces in lower Manhattan and Westchester. So to avoid that, he places small numbers of his army along the shoreline of Westchester to keep an eye for the British landing forces, which they do in October. And they land at Throg's Neck. They don't realize, however, because there are no maps of the area at this time, that Throg's Neck is essentially an island connected to the mainland of Westchester only at low tide. And it runs through a very nasty swamp, which is not a great place to invade Westchester from. So the British Army spends several days there consolidating itself, preparing for its next move, and on the 18th of October, they land over here at Pell's Point, which juts out into Long Island Sound. About 4,000 Hessian and British soldiers land, and they are met by about 750 American soldiers under the command of Colonel John Glover, who was encamped about half a mile north of here. And he has 4 understrength regiments from Massachusetts and 3 guns, meaning cannons. And he marches them forward down the same road that he realizes they need to march up. He has a small command of 40 men run down the road to meet the British advance guard, and they engage to slow down or stop temporarily the British advance. Well, Glover takes the opportunity to position his troops. His regiment and all of 3 of his guns he keeps on this side of the Hutchinson River, on a hillside overlooking the one and only bridge that crosses the Hutchinson River, which they start disassembling. And his 3 remaining regiments, including himself, go across and forward, and he hides one regiment behind various stone walls, 3 different stone walls alongside the road that he knows the British need to march past. Ultimately, the captain's guard of 40 men are pushed back because the British reinforcements, 4,000 men, come up, and 40 against 4,000. And they fall back as the British Hessians move forward, and when they come within range of the first stone wall, the regiment behind there stands up, fires, and forces the British Hessians back. And they fight for probably an hour and a half in that position, fire 7 volleys at each other until the British bring up enough men that they can start outflanking the stone wall. And with that, the rebels fall back to the second stone wall, Shepherd's regiment. And here, where the bulk of the battle actually takes place, it lasts until sometime after lunch. They fire 17 volleys at each other, and the British fall back several times, giving an opportunity actually for one of Shepherd's men to jump over the wall and run down to the British casualties in the road and steal the canteen and hat off of one of the British officers who was badly wounded, and return to his position. But again, ultimately, the British bring up enough guns and men to outflank the position, and they fall back on the last stone wall, Lomney Baldwin's regiment, and they spend the least amount of time fighting in that position because I suspect the British already figure there's somebody behind that stone wall and we're just going to flank it and infilade it to start with. So Baldwin's troops fire only 2 shots and they have to fall back. But the important thing is that it has slowed down the British advance to an all-day event, and Glover's men now retreat, cross over the Hutchinson River. And when the British come into view, the regiment hiding on the hillside overlooking what used to be the bridge open fire with their 3 guns. The British stop in their position and they bring up something like 7 guns and return fire, and that's how the battle ends as the sun goes down. They're firing cannonballs at each other and doing very little damage to each other, but making them, the British and Hessians, stay put on the east side of the Hutchinson River, thus giving time for Washington's army to begin to evacuate Manhattan and go north in a very slow, painful retreat to White Plains, where they will dig entrenchments, and 10 days later will begin the Battle of White Plains.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this unique perspective of Manhattan Island. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and like, and please leave a comment. I love comments. Happy travels.